Perhaps the number one determinant of the intangibles in any product or service is the service component per se. Buck Rogers, for 15 years, was the corporate marketing vice president at the IBM company. Rogers, in his new book, The IBM Way, released in 1986, commented, "Most companies are a lot better at prospecting for new customers and selling those prospects than they are at maintaining the customer list." For anybody who has ever sold for a living as much as a day, we all know that the rottenest way to spend your life is that miserable existence called cold calling. The name of the game is to take those people who are already your customers, grow them into larger customers, and work off the list of existing clients. As we talk about service, then, the real key is this focus on maintenance and extension and enhancement of the current customer list. In thinking about this entire customer notion, what we need to focus upon is the generic or overall cast of the organization toward the customer. Scandinavian Air Systems experienced a remarkable and radical turnaround in the 1981-83 time period. They went from losing about $20 million a year to earning over $70 million a year on $2 billion in sales, and made that transformation in a very short period. The reason, quite simple, their managing director, Jan Carlson, talks incessantly about a customer focus at SAS. His way of doing so, and the metaphor that he's developed, is one that I rather like. He says, quite simply, SAS has 10 million customers a year. Each SAS customer comes in contact, on average, with 5 SAS employees. Therefore, SAS is the product of the 10 million customers times the 5 employees who have contact with the customers. Multiply the two together, and, says Carlson, SAS is 50 million moments of truth per year. 50 million unique and never-to-be-repeated opportunities to differentiate ourselves from the rest of our competition. He says, finally, my job as a manager is simple: manage the daylights out of those moments of truth. Our objective is, quote, an obsessive commitment to managing the customer's experience at all points in the cycle of service. And let's look at it from another perspective. There's an analysis which is seldom done. We talk about revenue added from a particular customer. We seldom talk about what the cost is of losing a customer. One of the most effective real estate developments, it's an office park, is outside of Kansas City. It's known as Corporate Woods. Corporate Woods is an operation that is absolutely fanatic about customer maintenance, and to reinforce that point, they talk about what it costs to lose a customer. For example, if they lose a leaseholder, on average it will cost them 3 to 6 months of rent, $10 to $15 per square foot to tear out the existing fixtures and remodel, and the loss of a 6% leasing commission on a 3 to 5 year lease for the new customer who comes in. In general, the cost of loss of a customer is just exceptional, and yet it is one that we seldom tend to calculate. When I give seminars, I very often carry with me as a prop only one thing, and that one thing is the February 13th, 1985 business section of the San Francisco Chronicle. February 13th is notable in a business sense, at least, as the day after the IBM company announced its new Sierra line of mainframe computers, a line of computers which is now projected to kick the company's revenues up by a full $10 to $20 billion. The Sierra line was announced, and of course, since the Chronicle is a major part of the Silicon Valley area, it's a big story locally, and thus the Chron sent its reporters down to Silicon Valley to interview the other major players who are in that area. Amdahl, for example, the National Advanced Systems part of National Semiconductor, which also sells computers. And coming from these interviews was a major story. The title of that story I find amusing. It said, focusing on the Sierra introduction of the prior day, competitors pleasantly surprised. Competitors of IBM have been pleasantly surprised about every IBM product offering since the company opened its doors in 1913. They are then amused, bemused, or surprised at the end of the year when IBM lucks into another $10 billion in incremental sales. As a sometimes observer of business history, it's my simple conclusion that the IBM company is the first company in the history of the free world to grow from zero to $50 billion on the basis of blind luck alone. That is to say, while many may consider IBM a day late and a dollar short from an innovation standpoint, the difference between IBM and its many competitors is pure and simple. IBM pays attention to the service function and the maintenance of the customer list. The entire organization resounds to the customer. For example, IBM has 400,000 people on its payroll. Every IBM job description, and I mean for the accountants, for the MIS people, for the manufacturers, as well as for the marketing and sales types, every job description explicitly spells out the, quote, customer connection, unquote. That is the way in which any job directly influences the interaction with the ultimate customer of IBM's. Likewise, every single performance evaluation in the 400,000 person company begins with an assessment of the degree to which the person is customer oriented. Again, just as true for the people in accounting and personnel as for the people in marketing and sales. Well, when I attempt to assess the degree to which a company is focused on its customers, focused on service, focused on maintenance and enhancement of the customer list that we have today, the first question I always ask is, who are the company heroes? And what I mean by that is the following. Let's take some major industries. Start with retailing. In the past decade or so, the heroes have been the well-trained buyers and merchants, the people who purchase the merchandise, who go here, there, everywhere to make sure that they're purchasing merchandise that's on top of the fashion trends. If those are the heroes, who are the unsung people or the people who, in fact, are neglected? In retailing in general, it's been the store managers. A while back, I was giving a seminar for about a $2 billion retailer, and the chief operating officer of the organization came up to me at a break, and I was pretty new to the retail business at the time, and he pulled me aside and he said, "Tom, listen," he said, "you got to understand," he said, "basically, it just doesn't take a whole lot of brains to operate a store, you know." I think that simple question that he asked me went a long way toward explaining why the behavior in the stores in his particular company is appalling, and that's being very nice about it. Well, that's the retail world. Let's go to the world of engineering or science-driven or technology companies. Who are the heroes there? Invariably, they are the engineers or the scientists, the people in product development, the people in research and development. Who are the people who are neglected? To put it mildly, the people in sales and the people in service. Those people in the sales and field service operation are merely considered to be not particularly intelligent mouthpieces who serve the role of telling customers about the magnificent, wonderful product features that the engineers and scientists have invented. Or let's go to that world of real estate that I was talking about a little bit before. Who are the heroes there? The architects who create the award-winning designs, the deal makers who put together the mega-dollar programs that allow us to build those designs. Who are the neglected people? The people who change the light bulbs, the property managers. And yet who, in the real estate operation, is above all responsible for the maintenance of the clientele? Pure and simple, the maintenance people, the property management people. My point then is the following. For the last few decades, we have associated heroism with the analysts and the fast trackers, the people who are the architects, the deal makers, the merchants, the buyers, the scientists, and the engineers. The neglected people have been the executors, the neglected people with the exception of the winning companies. And from the world of corporate woods in real estate to giant food in retailing to the world of the Hewlett-Packards or the IBMs, the heroes there in the winning operations, almost without fail, are the people on the execution side. A while back, we translated In Search of Excellence into a public television show. The show was 90 minutes long, but amongst those 90 minutes, I had a distinctly favorite 15 seconds. It was the 15 seconds which focused upon the extraordinary degree of training which Walt Disney Productions gives to the people who sweep the park. In retrospect, I find that to be true genius. I mean, think about it for a minute. Within that extensive operation, who is the person who has the longest amount of unstructured time in front of the customer? Well, it's not the youngster who's selling tickets because there are 23 people in line behind you, and it would be rude to interrupt that youngster with a question. It's not the kid who's driving the Jungle Boat because he or she is too busy driving the Jungle Boat. Who are you willing to ask the dumbest jerk question to in the world? Obviously, the person who's not doing a whole lot productive, namely the person who's sweeping the park. And indeed, systematic surveys by Disney suggest that the most unstructured questions do go to the sweeper. Disney's solution? Very simple. Train the living daylights out of those sweepers. The average sweeper gets about 4 days of in-classroom training before they're ever set loose on the tarmac. The 4 days is exceptional in any event, but absolutely dramatic when you realize that the average job expectancy is only about a dozen weeks. Extraordinary investment in the support and service heroes. Quite often, it really means redefining what's possible, and that indeed is what we find throughout these many, many tales. A friend operates 25 Burger King franchises. I happen to be quite a fan of the McDonald's organization, but nonetheless, this particular fellow's franchises all do better than the McDonald's that's located close at hand. In fact, the worst of his franchises do about 125% better than the McDonald's that's usually within a block of his operation. Now, how did he pull something incredible off like that? Well, let's look at one small piece of it. Quite frankly, there's essentially an unspoken rule in the fast food business and many associated businesses which says, for all practical purposes, keep the turnover rate up as high as you possibly can so that you can keep the average wage down to $3.35.1, namely as close to minimum wage as possible. He didn't look at it exactly that way. Whenever one of his people has put in 6 months of service with him, he puts $600 into a scholarship account that can be spent on any form of advanced education. He will do that for up to 4 different times, namely 24 months or $2,400. Now, to top that, in his particular area, he has a lot of older men and women working for him. The older men and women can either use the money for their own adult education or they can use it for the advanced education of their sons or daughters, as the case may be. Does it work? He says he doesn't have any idea whether it works whatsoever. What he does know is that turnover in his industry, in his neck of the woods, tends to run about 330% a year. His runs about 3.75% a year. He thinks that this tiny difference may have a little to do with the fact that the service that he offers is perceived to be the very top of the mark. Let me give a specific example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about and how a company might turn its attention toward creating a new class of heroes. An American colleague of ours runs a large portion of Toshiba USA, the part that's involved in selling the printer products in the electronics business. Now, he's faced with many competitors, both Japanese and American, who are much larger than he is, who have much larger advertising budgets than he has, and so on. He decided that the way that he could differentiate from those people was to focus on the service opportunity. He looked around and found to his delight, after a little bit of digging, that he had a terrific way to get into the service stuff. Namely, every single month, there are about 4,000 customers who call into his product support operation. As he described it, suddenly we found that we had 4,000, quote, opportunities, unquote. That is, the chance to turn each of those 4,000 calls into a positive experience with the customer. If that was to be the case, then it was crystal clear. He needed a new class of heroes, namely the people who man the phones and answer the phones. And that's exactly what he went out to create and has done an exceptional job at doing so. Suddenly, the customer support people, the receptionists, and the field service people have become his heroes. For instance, his management team meets once a month. Every time they have a meeting, they begin the meeting with a report on product support calls. And, for instance, one will find a team of receptionists reporting to top management about their impressions of customer impressions during the last 30 days. It's been a wildly successful program, and despite his smaller budgets and despite the violent competitiveness of the market, he is charging 25% premiums for his product and growing market share against much larger competitors. Okay, we've talked about the general service focus. We've talked about the creation of new classes of service heroes. Let's get down to the very essence of the matter. Quite simply, it is my strong belief, whether the topic be the sale of an aircraft engine or a hamburger at a Burger King franchise, that the number one predictor of future success or failure is the hard-nosed, hard-boiled, quantitative measurement of total customer satisfaction, as I call it. A couple of years ago, a colleague and I put on a 3-day seminar for about 40 members of the Young Presidents Organization. There is no more cantankerous group around, and at the end of 3 days, if you can get them to agree on what month it is, you've created a minor miracle. To our astonishment, all 40 of these people agreed that the be-all and the end-all for business success is long-term total customer satisfaction and repeat business. And so I asked these people, I said, look, 100% of you say that total customer satisfaction is the most important thing around. How many of you measure it and then go the extra step of somehow tying those measures directly to compensation or evaluation in some form or other? Well, the answer was pretty grim, namely 0. 40 out of 40 people say it's the be-all and the end-all of life. None out of 40 in this sample, and I took lots of subsequent samples, do a darn thing about it. It's that silly. Market share is a great thing to have. Profitability is terrific. Positive cash flow is a winner. Earnings per share growth, if you're a publicly held company, is a marvelous thing, to put it mildly. But those are all indicators of the past, in our view. The best indicator of the future is that quantitative measurement of customer satisfaction. It is shocking to me how few people do it. IBM does. One of our other favorites is Domino's Pizza. Every week, they sample several thousand customers' response to customer satisfaction. They summarize those responses within 24 hours of receiving them, visibly and publicly post those responses in every one of their facilities, and then on a monthly basis, tie the quantitative satisfaction measures directly to compensation for everyone from the receptionist to the president of the organization. Frito-Lay, the magnificent $2.8 billion snack food company, likewise ties customer satisfaction measures to compensation for everyone, including in particular the people who are in the plants and the people who are in manufacturing. I wish that the time that we have together would allow me to spend literally hours talking about this issue of satisfaction measurement. It's one thing to mention it. It's another thing to say that it must be frequent. It's a third thing to say that it should be tied to evaluation, but that glosses over the issues, to put it mildly. Quite frankly, there's nothing tougher in my experience than coming up with a truly superb measure of customer satisfaction. The reason for that rather negative assessment is quite simple, and that is the very worst person to talk about what customer satisfaction is you, the listener, mainly because you are an expert. You know why you think your product or service is great, and frankly, that has little to do with why the customer assesses it as good, bad, or indifferent. Let me give you an example to support the point. A fellow in the Southwest has about a 50 to 60 branch mundane plumbing supply business. He was facing a very competitive market, as I suppose every plumbing supply wholesaler and retailer does, and was trying to figure out how to differentiate. He did exactly what I would have suggested that he do. He decided to focus on attributes of customer satisfaction that would allow him to separate himself from the herd. So, next step was to go around in a very, very extensive process to all of his branch managers, interview them in depth about what was important. And the answers that came back, I think, were quite exceptional and to the point. They said, what we need is a more attractive outlet. We need better phone service. We need to upgrade the capability of our salesperson's skills and hire more talented salespeople. And above all, we're getting killed on price, and we need to really shave a couple of points off the price. Well, in fact, he listened, he took note, and he did everything that his branch managers had suggested, and things got worse. Well, to his great credit, he didn't give up. He did it again. This time, he went not to the branch managers, but to the horse's mouth per se, namely the customer per se. His appalling finding was that virtually none of his branch managers had visited customers at the customer location. That is, if a plumbing contractor, a customer of his, came into the branch, terrific, but he never went out to the job site or never went out to their offices. So when he went and did his person-to-person interviewing, he found out a whole different set of answers. And it turned out that the plumbing contractors were unconcerned with branch appearance, didn't care very much about phone courtesy, thought the former skill level of salespersons had been just terrific. Their problem was the following. If they're on a job with an 18-person crew making $27.50 an hour, and they have an order from our friend, they want that order to be 100% complete. Because when you order 200 parts, 190 come in, but the 10 include some part that's really critical to the process, you have to leave that whole crew on the job for 8 or 10 hours without getting anything done. So order fulfillment became the key, and it, in fact, was much more important than price. Based upon a whole year's worth of research, he completely revised his approach to customer satisfaction, provided an order fulfillment rate that was unheard of in the industry. Namely, he promised that he would provide 100% of the product ordered if it was still made within 24 hours. Otherwise, you got the entire order free. Likewise, if you came into one of his operations, there was a clock that was put on as you arrived, and if you weren't served in 20 minutes after you arrived, you got the order free. Given all that, the plumber, the person in the field, his customer, was willing to pay a few cents extra. He instilled these new ideas of what was important in customer satisfaction. Growth, profitability, and the ability to charge an extra few pennies has followed in its wake. The important point here is the customer satisfaction elements that were critical to the customer per se were not obvious, to put it mildly. Customer satisfaction can become a major portion of the way the organization talks. Let's go back to our IBM example for just one moment. IBM has many celebrations of Salesforce success. Whenever a person is recognized at a celebration in IBM, a person who's in the field, a marketing or sales rep, never, ever is that person's sales figure mentioned. What's mentioned instead is the person's name and the quantitative 2-decimal point figure which constitutes their customer satisfaction rating. That is, if I were working for them and had been lucky enough to win an award and it came time for my recognition in front of spouses and peers, I would be introduced as Tom Peters, whose customer satisfaction rating for the last year is 8.74 or 9.73 or whatever the case may be. Customer satisfaction is about 1,000 things done just a tiny bit better. It's all those things that add up to an extraordinary strategic distinction and competitive edge over the long haul. That's the small steps attribute of it. It's also something else, a phrase I like, be bold. Boldness in pursuit of customer satisfaction. I believe it was Apple Computer's advertising agency that developed the name event marketing. For instance, I mentioned before Corporate Woods, the office park development outside of Kansas City that's been so successful. Corporate Woods, simply to say thanks to its tenants and to the neighborhood that supported it, threw a little party this past July 4th. 25,000 people showed up. Likewise, every couple months, Corporate Woods has a picnic for tenants and their families. About 3,000 or 4,000 people show up to these bi-monthly affairs. How many people would even think, running an office park, running a small store, or running a large operation, of inviting 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 25,000 people in just to say thanks to them and to show that you care, that you're paying attention? Well, let's not even stick in that exotic world. Every summer, somewhere up in the far northern reaches of Maine, A small wood stove company has a little confab for its customers, several days long. About 5,000 show up for the entire event. Or more ridiculous than that, down on the Monterey Bay, there's a non-exotic business, if ever there was one, called the Granite Rock Company. You can guess from their name what they do. They simply chip rocks out of a quarry and deliver them for road rock projects, building rock, so on and so forth. Granite Rock bought a machine, state-of-the-art, about a year ago. They were so darn proud of it that they wanted to share the good news with their friends and neighbors. So they invited a few customers, 3,000, to come down to Monterey Bay to a rock quarry to take a look at a new machine. It's that sort of boldness in pursuit of customer satisfaction that I believe all of us should be looking out for as potential opportunities. And note the sorts of people I've talked about. I've talked about everybody from Apple Computer to a wood stove company to a granite rock company. So this is nothing that's exclusively in the province of the IBMs of the world.